Thank you, committee. Welcome. First thing on the agenda, check to see if there are any requests for bill introductions. Are there any? Seeing none. Thank you, folks. Okay, we'll move on. We have a presentation today, and it's all about talking about targeted case management. Our first conferee is Mandy Flower with ks, and I will call her up, and you have the floor. Welcome.
Today we're talking about targeted case management. You will often see targeted case management referred to as TCM, so that might be something that you hear through this presentation as well as when you're out in the community. Targeted case managers provide multiple services. We just listed some here. They're advocates for the person. You know, they work with people's circle of support. They ensure and promote choice, and we'll get into those more here in a little bit. On the next slide, there's MCO care coordination and there's targeted case management on the IDD waiver. And targeted case management consists of services that are aimed at special groups of enrollees, such as those with an intellectual disability. So TCM, in comparison to just regular case management, TCM works with a targeted population, such as the IDD population. And in Kansas, TCM services are those services which will assist the person in gaining access to social, educational, and other needed resources. The definition of TCM includes 4 components. Assessment, the targeted case manager is responsible for assessing the person's needs, taking the person's history, identifying needs, and they report to the MCO on changes in conditions, changes in services that are needed, things like that. They also take this information and develop a service plan, which is also known as a person-centered support plan. You might see that too in an acronym PCSP. With that, people are updating the person-centered plan. They're participating in IEP meetings, and they're really the glue that's bringing that whole team together. So if a person is receiving IDD waiver services and they live in a group home, they attend day services, that TCM is the person who brings all of those different disciplines together to create that person-centered support plan. So everybody's voice can be heard and goals can be developed based on what the person wants and what they need to be successful in the community. They also complete referral and related activities and ensuring choice. Choice is a big thing in our IDD waiver program. We want to assure that everyone has choice to live, receive services in their community of choice. So TCMs are really important in this respect because they will support the person in making the choice that's best for them. They also do referrals to community resources. TCMs are throughout the state, and they know their community and they know the resources well that can benefit folks that are on the waiver as well as on the IDD waiting list. The 4th component of TCM is the monitoring and follow-up. And the monitoring and follow-up identifies changes in the needs of the person. It ensures the care plan, PCSP, are being implemented and addresses a person's needs and wants. Also reports that information to the MCO care coordinator. So the targeted case manager and the care coordinator are very complementary roles. They're different, but they work together to make sure that services, supports are in place for the person served. And as you can see, I have care coordination in another column. And care coordination really works on the healthcare needs assessment. So they're looking at that and integrating healthcare with the social support services. So that's where that TCM and MCO care coordinator meet to provide these services and ensure these services are in place. So TCM service recipients. When Kansas moved to a managed care state, IDD stakeholders reported about the importance of keeping their TCM service. Self-advocates to this day report that TCM is critical to supporting their life in the community. To maintain the services for these participants, we developed the roles and responsibilities that we just saw about TCM and care coordination to split those duties so stakeholders, self-advocates, anybody on the IDD waiver can keep that targeted case management. Approximately 11,000 people on the IDD waiver receive IDD TCM annually, and that's across the state. And 14 to 15 million is spent annually on the service. We have TCM agency here today, and we also have Interhab that works with a variety of providers that provide TCM service. So to become a TCM provider, you have to affiliate with the CDDO. Kansas has 27 CDDOs through the state. We looked, and currently there are 82 TCM agencies who support people on the IDD waiver. But there's a caveat. There's a few more because some of our bigger agencies, they will provide case management in other counties, such as you will hear from Case Management Services that they provide those services in other counties. So this is not a duplicative number, so that number's a little higher, but this is just all the different agencies. Many TCM providers are at capacity, their caseloads. They can't take on any more clients. And Johnson County CDDO website indicates that they have 19 affiliated TCM agencies, but only one open to new referrals. And we'll discuss that more later. There's a real capacity issue across the state, and we're trying to develop ways to help enhance that service capacity. So to obtain TCM services, the CDDO determines if the person qualifies for the IDD waiver. Once that person is found to be eligible for the waiver and is receiving Medicaid, that person qualifies for TCM services. So TCM services can be provided while folks are on the waiting list. The TCM will do a variety of things while the person is on the waiting list. They will connect them with local resources, supports, help them fill out documentation. As you all know, Medicaid is a very complex system, and as a parent trying to navigate that while you also have a child with a developmental disability can be almost impossible. So these TCM staff really help people navigate that Medicaid system and other systems throughout this person's life. And then we've also talked about choice. Choice is very, very important. It's a core tenet of IDD service delivery, and TCMs really are big advocates to assure that choice. If a provider is providing services to someone on the waiver and the person decides they don't want to receive services from them anymore, the case manager will help them find and secure those resources that they want that new provider. The TCM will also work with the care coordinator to identify paid and unpaid supports that the person needs to be successful. And, you know, we are delighted to have CMS and Interhab here today to talk more about what they do in their direct case management roles. There are challenges facing this TCM service. Billing documentation. It's been reported by many of our stakeholders that our TCMs have to spend more time a week doing the documentation for their billing than actually providing the direct service. Many tasks also are not billable, and that means that they will not get reimbursed for those. That includes training, so to help TCMs improve their skills. The agencies do not get reimbursed for that, so they have to eat those costs when they pay those staff to attend trainings. Drive time, that's another thing that is not reimbursed. And for our Western Kansas providers, that can be very difficult because they're covering a large area to see the people that they serve. And recruiting and retaining new TCMs. We have gotten tremendous support from the legislature on IDD funding, and unfortunately, TCM services don't go in under that umbrella. So TCM rates have not seen any movement for over 10 years, and so they've been at the same rate this time, and as you all know, costs are going up. The need and the challenge to serve people is going up as well. And capacity issues throughout the state due to closures. Many TCM agencies are finding that they can't stay financially solvent providing these services, so they're closing down. We talked about caseloads and capacity. A lot of providers are at their limit, so caseloads will end up becoming very high for certain people. When these providers shut down or stop providing the service, that puts pressure on the other case management agencies to take on additional clients. And when their caseloads get higher, it's really hard to provide quality services to those folks on the IDD waiver. However, we also have some opportunities for improvement of the service. The governor's budget includes 1.5 million SGF for TCM rate increases. This would be very helpful in the sense that as we're talking about those agency closures, this would probably help a lot of agencies not close. And then it will also help TCM agencies to raise wages and help recruit and retain staff. Stakeholders have reported that, like in Big Lakes, they're trying to recruit staff, college degrees, and the salaries that they can offer just aren't conducive for the market. And it's very hard for them to keep those staff as they can go out and get jobs that pay more. And it's also very hard to retain staff when a lot of things aren't billable and you're spending a lot of time documenting when you got into this field to really provide direct service and support and advocate for people. With that, we also can reduce caseload sizes. When we reduce the caseload sizes, that increases the level of care and the services that TCMs can provide to the people they serve. If you have a caseload of 60, it's really hard to provide those intensive individualized supports. But when you have a caseload of 30, it's much more manageable. We also have a ARPA 9817 TCM initiative. It is in the late stages of procurement, but with that TCM RFP, one of the things that we're looking at is how can we fix this billing issue where folks are billing more than they're seeing people. We also have an initiative for charting the life course. Charting the life course is out of UMKC, and it discusses how we can build supports and plans for people on the waiver to make plans for the rest of their life. Right now, we look at what do you need the next year, what are your goals, and what are the resources you need. Charting the life course looks further out as a plan for your life. So that is very important, and that will also provide a framework for every TCM in the state to have this base knowledge on how they can utilize services and how they can develop person-centered support plans that best serve our folks on the IDD waiver. We also in this, we have some work to do on training with, working with the stakeholders. There have been training committee meetings with stakeholders of TCM subject matter experts, as well as KDADs, to discuss how we can get more consistent on that. That's going to continue. And as we spoke of, the redevelopment of billing procedures, so we can really ensure that TCM staff have the opportunity to provide that direct service, which is the intent of TCM services. As I said earlier, I'm very pleased that we have subject matter experts that are TCMs here today, and I would like to turn it over to Roxanne Hidaka and Sarah Otto from Case Management Services to talk about their experiences as TCMs.
Okay, before we do that, can we stop and see if there are questions thus far? Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 82 TCM agencies, 27 CDDOs. How many CDDOs do TCM?
I know, we really love our acronyms. Are you talking about CDDOs that affiliate, or are you talking about the CDDOs?
Provide the
Oh,
targeted case management?
CDDOs cannot provide case management services. That's why they affiliate with TCM, Targeted Case Management Agencies, to do that service. CDDOs are really there to assess the person, to determine if they're eligible for the waiver, and affiliate with providers in their community to provide the services.
Thank you.
So the targeted case managers work primarily for the IDD providers.
That's correct.
All right, other questions, committee? Representative Droege.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a question on this billing thing, and how is it that they're billing for more than, billing for more than they're seeing people? I don't quite understand that.
And our subject matter experts can probably be better at this. They're not billing more. Drive time, there's a lot of things that aren't billable. So when they see people in service, it could theoretically be for a very short time, but the paperwork that they have to fill out to get the reimbursement for the service is very time intensive. So the services are provided to the person, but the billing procedures and getting the documentation correctly are extensive.
So the next question to that then is to whom is the billing done?
Where does the billing go to? It goes to the MCOs. So the TCMs develop their billing for the month. For the month?
We do it bi-weekly.
Okay.
So
No, come on.
Okay. So maybe that's a question we can kick the can down the road here for a little bit, but it would be interesting to know why the paperwork is so cumbersome, and maybe we can get that answer. Representative O'Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to slide number 7, you were talking about TCMs were actually shutting down. Is that correct? How many have actually shut down in the last year? I mean, what's the, or last year, last 2 years, what's, I would say, how many have actually shut down per se here in our state?
I have anecdotal information, but I can reach out to our CDDOs and get you information on that, if you would like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation as well. You use a lot of acronyms, and I'm learning, so
I know.
like We have a handy little cheat sheet here, and I'm using that as we go along. So a couple different questions for you. I did not find what ARPA stands for.
Oh, thank you. That is the American Rescue Plan Act. We have been, with the American Rescue Plan Act 9817, we have been awarded additional, what they call FMAP funds, federal medic matching, and I'm going to have to get back to you because we all do use a lot of acronyms and need cheat sheets. But we
TCM initiative, so
yes,
purpose of it didn't really
the TCM initiative,
information on there.
right. It's in our final stages of procurement at KDADS. And one of those things that we're looking at is the billing and how can we make that cleaner for our TCM providers so they won't be spending all this time doing that billing documentation and can go out and see the people we serve.
I have a few more questions as well. So I know you mentioned you're spending a lot of time, and 50% of the time on just putting together what the billing is and tracking the time. And I don't know how many people you have, what the staff equates to. And then when you say it's about 50% of the time, is that in a 40-hour week? Or because that is a concern that we're spending a lot on something that's actually very administrative and sounds like maybe could be automated and we could be providing services more so than on the administrative side. I'm all about efficiencies. So can you provide us some details on that?
Absolutely. That billing probably is weekly, would you say?
I don't know the answer to the question then, but maybe there's something we can do to get some further information that breaks down and gives us some examples and walks us through that, because I know some folks in healthcare that have left because of all the paperwork, even though they love taking care of people. So that's a concern. And then also the IDD wait list. So in some areas with Medicaid, there are people that are utilizing the services, but yet maybe should be coming off. I don't know that you have that as much in what you all do. So do you have that, first of all, is the first question is for that?
People coming
Off
off.
of the services that don't need them anymore, or are they once on them, always needing those?
The IDD waiver is a lifelong waiver.
And then what does the wait list look like with number of people that are not able to get services but need and qualify for services?
The last time I checked, our waiting list is a little over 9,000.
9,000 people waiting. And what ages of population are we looking at, and for what reasons primarily? And do we have a way that we can structure those or get those through faster or anything like that at all that's happening or we're looking at?
Ages, you can qualify to be on the waiting list for the IDD waiver at age 5. So ages range from 5 to, we have a lot of folks that have been living with their families, and their families are aging, and now they're on the waiting list as well. So the ages really range. That is why the TCM comes in there, because they can get that service and really supports them in getting needed natural resources, natural supports, things in their community, as well as a lot of folks are on the waiting list are under 21. So the case manager attends IEP meetings to really assure that the person is getting the goals that they need.
I think this is my last question, Mr. Chair. Do you all handle respite care for somebody who wants to help step in to provide some basic downtime for somebody who is taking care of an individual that has, a lot of high special needs? Does your organization handle that?
Well, at KDADS, we do not. At TCM, there's also a distinct rule that TCMs cannot provide a direct service. So they do not provide the respite service.
Individual, and I'm asking because I know this situation specifically occur, I have a friend in this situation, so, and maybe it's not, maybe it's for another organization that would do that. Okay, thanks.
We're all learning together, Representative, well, not all of us. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of clear up a couple of things. They bill in 15-minute intervals only when they're meeting with that customer or with that client. So the rest of the time, their driving time and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is the waiting list is about 5,000 and we serve 9,000.
That's right.
So, and I know you're nervous, so I'm just, but I just finished an interim committee this whole summer on this subject and probably could tell you more stuff than you'd ever want to know. But so anyway, just for those clarifications. And the waiver service, which is, we're getting into a can of worms here, but the waiver service includes 13 different services. The ID and DD waiver includes 13 services, including respite care and 11 or 12 more. And so that's kind of where you get into it. And so my questions are more, I'm going to get off my deal here, but so what are our current hourly rate for TCMs?
I believe it's 13, 43, 43, 42.
Andy, if someone's answering from the galley, I've just been reminded we're on WebEx, so we need to have them come to the podium.
Our current reimbursement rate for TCM is $43.42 per hour, and it's billed to the 15 minutes, so it's like $10.80, somewhere in my testimony.
And so in the governor's budget, there's $1.5 million, 3.8, all funds, so that will raise it to how much? Does anybody know?
I don't have that information.
It's $54. So how many services would a typical TCM serve?
The caseload ranges, typically, an ideal caseload would be 30. However, with our capacity issues, they've gone up. We've seen caseloads that are 60 and more.
And then just to answer your question, the one that I'm aware of that doesn't do TCM anymore is Kletch out of Wichita. Ketch doesn't do, it costs them too much money to provide that service. Just to the committee's information, last year we were working on and didn't get finished up, but, and I would like KDADs to gather this information, how states bill differently. I know I have pretty good information. There are states that bill hourly and that we don't go through that 15-minute time clock. And I think you guys punch a time clock, don't you, too? Yeah. See, there's a time clock, and it's actually, they punch in and actually monitor those. The MCOs monitors those clocks, and you send them in once a week. So that's how they bill. So that, and so I think it's just totally antiquated. And to your point, I think that they waste more time punching the time clock. Can you imagine I get 15 minutes and then, 15 minutes is up, we're out of here, punch the time clock, and I'm on. And so it's very, very unproductive. And we were just getting into that last year and trying to gather information, because at first I thought that our 15-minute intervals were nationwide, but in fact, there are states that do hourly billing. And so that's a question for another day. But anyway, I'm done, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Representative Hobson.
I just have a question for. In regards to where you're talking about the 15 minutes, is that something that can be corrected in our committee, or something that has to be legislation, or is that, how is that, in your opinion, how do we, you just said it was unproductive?
This committee can propose that.
Okay. Part of the recommendation, is that what you're saying?
Truly, and there's a lot more to, you know, the MCOs have to be on board with it, and we have to understand why they're billing in that, in 15 minutes. Are they trying to save time, or money, or or what, and so I suspect that they're trying to save money by billing in 15 minutes, because any services that these folks provide that they're not billed for, they don't get to pay for, so they save money.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Let's say it's a lot more complicated than we can change it, because it has a lot to do with, that calling it in is, you're calling in from your location, and you're basically using your cell phone or a phone that's supplied to you, and that's how that's recorded, and it depends on where you call from, and, are you within those limits, and can you bill at what that rate is? So it gets a lot more complicated when we go to say, how do we do this? So when we say we want to change it, I mean, it's like, are we going to change it in the policy? I mean, and does that mean that all of the agencies that are delivering the case managements, will they be on board with doing that at that particular time? But what we do know is what you're asking. We need to simplify it. Okay?
Thank you. Mandy, before we turn this over to the next group, I do have just a couple questions myself, if that's okay. We were talking earlier about the billing documentation, and you talked about how cumbersome that was, and you said that the billing was to the MCOs. Okay, the next question then is the TCM reimbursement rate has been the same for over a decade, and that is reimbursed by the MCOs again? Are we talking about MCOs there?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And one thing, for us newbies, which I am a newbie, would you give us a quick definition or explanation of the Medicaid waiver?
Of the HCBS IDD waiver? Okay, so with the IDD waiver, like we talked about earlier, you will have to get a developmental disability diagnosis from a certified healthcare provider. Your eligibility for that IDD waiver is determined at one of the 27 CDDOs across the state. So when you're found eligible for that waiver, and then there's program eligibility that shows that you need the support to enforce and be able to learn these skills so you can live in the community. After we get that assessment done and they demonstrate that they need that support, it goes to KDHE and financial eligibility is determined. After that is determined, somebody's on the waiting list and they can then receive TCM services. The CDDO will provide a list of TCM agencies that they can choose from, and they'll pick a TCM, and then they will start working on resources, things like that. When you're on the waiver, you can receive a menu of services such as residential, day programs, supported employment, personal care services, respite, and I'm trying to think what else, home modifications. When you're on that waiver, you have this team of professionals also that's called the Circle of Support. And the Circle of Support is comprised of those staff from the day program, residential program, targeted case manager, for example, and the MCO care coordinator, as well as the participants' family, really whoever they want to be a part of their circle of support. And that is when the TCM gets all of those folks together and they develop that person-centered support plan, also known as PCSP. With the PCSP, that's where goals are identified, what the person needs individually to live in their community, and TCM develops that information, develops an ISP or PCSP that really runs the program, and they work with the MCO, and that's where services that are needed get the authorizations to be implemented.
So the waiver is issued because this person would not otherwise qualify for Medicaid without that diagnosis, is that?
The waiver is for people, it is to ultimately prevent folks from having to go to a higher level of care. So we put these supports around someone in their community, and they're successful. If they didn't have these supports, there's a good chance that these folks would end up in a higher level of care, and that's when we're talking about state hospitals, things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll call Roxanne.
Go, Rox.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Roxanne Hadaka. I am co-owner of Case Management Services, Inc., an independent case management agency firm in Kansas City. I've been a case manager in the state of Kansas for the past 30 years. Very proud of that. I am speaking to you as a representative of all independent case managers in Kansas. I've been here since the beginning. I have been the boots on the ground with individuals with IDD and their families through multiple administrations in the state. I've been with them through policy changes, budget cuts, inception of managed care organizations, which I still have a hard time with, and the public health emergency that happened 3 years ago. As Assistant Interim Commissioner Flowers shared, I provide targeted case management to a specific population, people with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities who are age 5 and older and eligible for Medicaid. I do want to say that there are individuals on the waiting list that don't get Medicaid, don't qualify for Medicaid, but may private pay for case management if they're able to. Not very many people are able to do that. We do a lot of pro bono work. So in Kansas, the waiting list, we've talked about this already, is about 10 years long. There was a time many years ago when there wasn't a waiting list. So when people got out of high school, they could go straight into a service. They could go to a day service, get a job, and now they have to wait 10 years. It's very sad. So anyways, if a parent actually, when their child is 5 years of age, if they apply for services, they might get it when they're a teenager. They need services before they're a teenager, so I'm hoping we can work on that. That might be another committee. We must learn and understand where we have been to understand where we need to go as a community, as public servants, and as representatives with fiscal responsibilities. 55 years ago, the national phenomenon of deinstitutionalization of persons with IDD began in the U.S. when institutions failed to meet the most basic needs people served: personal hygiene, nutrition, medical support, engagement. We do have a little story, or a film that you could watch to see what it used to be like. Lives Worth Living. Home and community-based services first became available in the 1980s, when after deinstitutionalization. We believe that people with IDD could thrive and live in their home and engage in the community with appropriate paid supports to meet their basic human needs and rights. I've already said I've been doing this for 30 years. This job is a very, very important job, and my business partner and I, Meredith Funkhauser, we started this agency after being independent case managers, where we just worked for ourselves, 12 years ago. We have 15 targeted case managers working for our company. They come to us with master's degrees in social work, education, and public administration. We have staff with backgrounds in adult services, OT, special ed, mental health, and managed care coordination. We did hire a managed care coordinator that wanted to switch, and he's great. We have wonderful staff with passion for the work that they do each day. They have families, student loans, mortgages, monthly costs for private health insurance, because we can't provide that. We've already talked about the Medicaid rate, $10.83 for every 15 minutes of work. This rate has been a factor in the closure of some independent targeted case management agencies in Johnson County, but the demand for TCMs still remains the same, because people turn 18 every day and which means when you turn 18, you can get your own Medicaid if your parents don't qualify for Medicaid. So there's always people turning 18 that will need case management. Let me go to this next page here. So with the operational costs of being an independent case management agency, the rates we can offer at TCM is not considered competitive when they can make $16.75 working at Chipotle. The minimum requirements to be a TCM is a bachelor's degree in the related field, 2 years of experience, but that doesn't equate to the hourly rate that can be offered. I know that in Iowa, I believe the hourly rate up there is $80 an hour, or close to that. So every state's a little different in how they pay their case managers. We've already talked about the documentation that we do, start times and end times. Very time consuming, because a lot of times we answer the phone, we take a call, somebody else has sent an email, oh my gosh, the police are at so-and-so's house. So we get pulled in all different directions, and it's quite difficult to write down every single thing that we're doing throughout the day. As independent TCMs, we identify our worries, financial, training, and quality. The case management training online is like back from like 20 years ago. So a lot of the acronyms don't even exist anymore. I'd be glad to write a new one, a new manual. But technology and then respect for our role. We have identified core values of our job, person-centered and focused. We want our individuals to have the best life possible. Collaboration and partnership with various providers and stakeholders, integrity, quality, and accountability. As a state, a financial investment was made starting 2 years ago to make improvements to support targeted case managers. We recognize that importance. We hope that you continue to see that investment so that we can meet the needs of our most vulnerable population. Our agency is surviving, but other independent case management agencies are closing. We're surviving because of passion, sarcasm, collaboration, and the unwavering belief that people with IDD deserve conflict-free case management to assist with their comprehensive support needs. Conflict-free case management is defined by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, meaning there is a separation of duties from coercion. So we only provide case management. Our agency just does that. There are agencies in the state that provide residential services, day services, and case management services. That has been looked at in the past as not being conflict-free, because if you're working for the agency that's supporting your individual, and then you're talking to the staff person saying, hey, this isn't right, then it's like, oh, you know, it's difficult. I'm sure you can understand. There is a little bit of duplication of care coordinators with the MCOs. I'm not joking about that. We went, 22 years without an MCO. We did everything. We wrote the plans. We talked to the state. There was no middleman. So it might be good to look at how much the MCOs are actually making off of this program. So anyways, our job is totally to support individuals with disabilities and their parents and siblings to make sure that their lives are the best that they can be. I will stand for questions if anybody has any.
Committee questions? Representative Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just mentioned the state of Iowa pays $80. Is that what you said?
$80 an hour.
What is, in terms of here in Kansas, how are we doing in terms of pay rate compared to our competitor, or compared to our neighboring states? I mean, how are we?
Well,
where
that's
do you
the
rank
only, Interhab may have better information about that. I'm not sure. But I had just heard that recently because somebody was moving up there and it was like, yeah, you know, we can get paid $80 an hour, and in Iowa. So I don't know what it's like in Missouri or Oklahoma or Colorado. But I can certainly do the research and get back with you. I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that depends. I think when he says you're looking more at Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and our Midwest. East Coast pays a lot more. But I will say, almost every state pays more than we do, even though they're Midwest. But I'm not sure we're all under the same system of how we really work. Because when you start checking with others, they do it a little differently than we do. So it's not easy to say, well, they pay more because you don't know exactly what their structure is. But it's one thing we should look at, though, in terms of how can we, like I say, simplify the system, but how can I say this? You made a comment that I have wondered myself. Not so much how much do MCOs get, but in terms of the system we have with CanCare. Is that really working best for us in this state? Because we went from SRS, Rehabilitation Services, to a private, and it's 3 private vendors. So we look at that in terms of it's for-profit versus it was not for-profit. But you just can't look at that in terms of MCO. You have to look at it in terms of services that's being delivered to Kansans, and are we meeting the needs of those Kansans? And I think one of the things that was mentioned first, especially if we look at families that have raised their children with, intellectual disabilities and all of that, in terms of how long they have taken care of them, maybe 30, 40 years. Now they're getting older and cannot. Then we would look in terms of they saved the state millions of dollars, but now they need help, and you're talking about 10 years. And people are saying, we don't have 10 years because we may not be here 10 years. And how will our children or our loved ones get the care we want? That is something that we really have to address. And we know that waiting list is just not going to work for us over the years. But it's very difficult to look at how Kansas is paying and how we're making payments because we're not under the same system. But we do know we have to do better with the system that we have.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the question I had.
Any other questions? Representative Droege.
I have you say many independent targeted case management agencies have closed. I thought that Representative Carpenter indicated one had closed, but there are many have closed.
Well, we've had, and I can get you the numbers in Johnson and Douglas counties, but we have had independent, like, you can be an independent case manager just by yourself, and a lot of those have closed because they couldn't sustain working for themselves, getting the rate of pay, and being able to support themselves. So I can get you the list of people that actually have closed. I'm more familiar with Johnson and Douglas counties because that's where we have case managers. So.
I don't know the second part of this is really a question. It looks like we need to modify the state training modules and the rate, instead of every 8 minutes, we do it a longer time what they bill. But this duplication of multiple instances of duplication of services and confusion of roles, that's obviously a waste of time and money.
I would agree. Well, when the MCOs came in and started having care coordinators that are individuals, we've always done everything. So, they have like a little 15-minute, check-in, like, well, I could do that, and I did for numbers of years, not having the middleman. But, I mean, it's here. I feel like it's here to stay. So I do think we should look at targeted case managers and care coordination and how we can do better at that. without duplicating services. They ask the same questions that we ask in our meetings. Well, we could just have one meeting. And about billing, back in the day, probably 20 years ago, we used to just bill, we kept track of everything we did for an individual, and then at the end of the month, we would just put it into a format and stick it in our computer, and so that anybody could go in and look and see, what I did for an individual. And it took about, 15 to 30 minutes a month. I can say I spend way more time than that doing case notes now because it's start and stop. I mean, it's exact times. Our system has by the minute. So we get a phone call, we started, so you can see how cumbersome that would be. So, do you have any other questions?
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. So
Thank you.
do you have a white sheet of the list of services that you do? I mean, is there something just spelled out that you will take care of, for instance, their Medicaid application?
We're not actually supposed to do that,
Okay, so what,
although it's complicated.
so do you take care of pharmacy needs for them? You line up that kind of stuff?
We definitely, we connect them with the services that they need. So Heartland Home Care, somebody needs their meds sent to their home, we will help, get them set up with that. Anything that they need in their lives, we help them with, getting connected. We don't do direct care, we're not allowed to, but we do support them in, getting them hooked up to get a job, or getting a new day service provider, or moving from one res setting to another res setting. So.
There's not just a list that you,
Oh, yeah, no, we have,
a list of those services that you would provide?
yeah. Yeah, it's in Article 63. We could print that out for you and get that to you.
Maybe one of the reasons, or one of these deals is to really find out if there is a duplication of services, because there's targeted case management, and then the MCOs also have case managers that work for them. And I think that's where we need to figure out is, are they doing the same thing? And who needs to be doing it, or who should be doing it? Are they doing the same thing for the same client? And that's, I think, a question for maybe the MCOs at some point in time about how their case managers handle this, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask a quick question. All right, so we started CanCare in 2013.
8 years.
And then the IDD portion came in 2014, so it was a year later. So we had that year that they could stay independent without coming into the new system, okay? So the system started on January 1, 2013. Well, I always smile at that because I wonder how many people are using services on New Year's Day. But when we look at the system, so would you say, in all honesty, because you have your own history of how it was before this system came in, when this system was initiated, it was to provide more effective services for Kansans using it. That was the main thing. It was never said that it would save us money, but that it would provide the needed services, better services, be more effective. Am I correct?
Yes.
That's how we stated that. How would you say now, almost 10 years later, how are we doing?
Well, it's very complicated. Let's just say I have a mom here who I'm getting a home mod for, but I had to go try and get grants before the MCO would cover her home mods. So globally, I would say they're not doing, it's another layer of bureaucracy, basically, we're still getting the same services for our individuals that we did for the past 30 years that I've been doing this, but it's more complicated, more time-consuming because we're having to go through an insurance company for everything. So I won't say that we're not getting the services for our individuals. We are. There's a 10-year waiting list. I'd love to get the people on my caseload off the waiting list so they could have services, which that's another problem. So, but it's just more difficult because we have to go through the MCS. So I will say that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.
Representative Barth.
Mr. Chair, I think this is a question for you, actually. So I know you're an independent company that's providing this service. How many organizations are there like you, or are you the only sole provider for the state for the services?
Oh, no, there are, well, I think Mandy said 82 case management agencies in the state. So we're one of the largest in Kansas, maybe the second largest, I don't know, first, I don't know for the largest, but we serve like 450 individuals, which is a lot of individuals. So
Your tracking of hours and time per service is really, it's your system that you're using. So each of these close to 80 organizations have their own system. So we can't, it's not like a way to streamline that. I have expertise in time and labor management systems. And so this is much more difficult than just one.
everybody does it differently. Yes.
Okay, we've got about 30 minutes left. Let me ask you a quick question. Can you just kind of give me a brief explanation of your specific business model for Case Management Services, Inc.? You're not an IDD provider, but you have 15 people on staff who are targeted case managers. Who are your ultimate clients?
All individuals with IDD, ranging in age from 5 to, I think my oldest individual is 72 years old.
And you obtain these clients how?
Oh, well, we get referrals. I mean, a lot of times we get referrals from parents that have already had us as a case manager, and they meet somebody, oh, you know, I've got a case manager. So, but then if we're open, we're just on the Johnson County website. People just call us. So
some of your clients are also clients of the IDD provider?
yes, we have a variety of individuals living in residential settings, going to day services and getting other, or having jobs out in the community.
And then you would only intercede if that IDD provider had no targeted case managers of their own?
Oh, no, no, no. No, there are just some agencies that provide all three of those services, day, res, and case management. So they're just like Lake Mary Center and JCDS, like those are big agencies that provide all of those services under one.
You don't find yourself overlapping with the targeted case managers of the IDD organizations or whatever?
No, I mean, we don't overlap. We may see individuals or case managers out in the community, but we don't overlap. We serve our people in whatever settings.
You don't have the same clients, in other words?
No.
Okay.
That's
All
a
right.
good question. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we can move on then. Is there someone else from your organization?
Sarah's gonna.
Okay.
Yes.
And like I say, we have about 30 minutes
Thank
left,
you so
so
much.
we'll just, if you can kind of summarize your testimony. Thank you very much.
My name is Sarah Otto. I'm the Executive Director with Case Management Services. And I have truly appreciated the opportunity to hear your questions, and they are fantastic questions. I am as old as home and community-based services and deinstitutionalization of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I don't know how many of you went to school with a person who had a developmental disability, but we've only been doing it since 1975, and thank you, I apologize. We've only been doing it since 1975, and I was one of the first graduating high school classes that graduated with a student with Down syndrome. So I am part of the inclusive education movement, And I believe that my classmates that have developmental disabilities deserve the right to live in the community, work in the community, participate in the community, and have the rights that they are human rights and the choice in the activities and where they live. I started in targeted case management in 2016. I'm a highly educated person. I know I'm here with other highly educated individuals. And I didn't know how much I didn't know until I became a TCM. And I spent that first year gathering information, learning, tracking down written documentation, because depending on who you asked, the answer could be correct or wrong. There is so much in this system that I have tried to synthesize and communicate to families so that we all have a better understanding of how it works and how it doesn't work. So a day in the life of a TCM. We talked a lot about billing. There's a lot of questions about it. My day, I might plan out, and I can be 100% confident that it's not going to go as I planned. That's the teacher in me. We adjust mid-stride. But it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not a Monday through Friday job. It might be a call at 7 a.m., or 7:11 to be exact, because I have to case note it, from a parent or a school bus letting me know that their apartment burnt down overnight and they had no place to go. They had only the clothes that they walked out with. And so finding resources in our community and linking them to that individual. 2 hours later, 1 hour and 53 minutes to be exact, I might be coordinating resources with churches and clothing shelters and the school and finding food and finding the best rate on a hotel so they had, 5 nights if they needed it before their apartment could put them back into an apartment. It's coordinating couches and dressers and beds. Might be a call from the Topeka Social Security office and their disability determination asking about an SSI application, and me having to explain to them what the IDD waiver is and that this person is eligible according to the state of Kansas, and the left hand and the right hand can have a conversation. It might be answering a call at 9:27 a.m. that Laura's food assistance has been turned off because the SNAP program is in such a backlog that even though she submitted her reapplication 2-3 months ago, they haven't processed it yet, and they haven't conducted her interview, so they just turned it off. So I'm referring her to food pantries so that she can get food for the week. Might be monitoring services at a day service to make sure that my friend Jeff is changed properly so that he is not dropped, that they are using a Hoyer lift or a 2-person lift, because an injury during changing, his toileting changing, could have dire consequences to his lifelong longevity. You can see, I'm not going to read all of this, but you can see how the day is, and those are true minutes of documentation that I am case noting. I'm not case noting my travel time. I might have traveled 20 minutes for a 20-minute meeting to travel 20 minutes back. I also might be getting a call at 8:27 p.m. when I'm in my pajamas, and a nonverbal son who is autistic had gotten upset at home and ran out of the apartment, and they couldn't find him, and we had to call the police, and they didn't speak English. And so I am there answering those calls. So this role is about answering the call. Targeted case managers answer the call. Care coordinators aren't answering the call. I don't know who would answer the call if I wasn't the one answering the call. And I'll let you read the rest of the details of the day in the life of a TCM. And that's not a bad day. That could just be a full moon day. That could be a Friday the 13th day. That could be a Tuesday. That is what every independent targeted case manager does. And we appreciate your time and your consideration and your desire to learn and understand better. And we hope that you're considering this as you look at the budget that's on the table in front of you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all of your service to our community.
Very good. Are there questions for Sarah? I think it's been answered. Thank you
Okay.
very much for.
Take a whole year to teach you how to be a TCM, but I'm happy to do it. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call Matt Fletcher, Executive Director of Interhab. Matt, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to tag along on this presentation this afternoon. It's fantastic to follow Mandy and Roxanne and Sarah, because so much ground has already been covered in explaining for you just how vital the case management role is for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But I do have some additional pieces I would like to throw into the mix for you to think about. Again, I'm Matt Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of Interhab. We are a state association that represents service providers and community developmental disability organizations within the Kansas IDD service system. So our members include quite a few across the state who have case management programs for the IDD population. And I will just be using the term case management as much as I possibly can. When I use the term case management, I'm referring to targeted case management. That's what it is in our world of IDD. But case managers are special to me. They have a special place in my heart. I started out after college. My first job in my professional career was as a case manager. And it's very heartening to hear Sarah's recounting of her day. It reminds me of many days I spent and many nights I spent with the individuals whom I provided service to, helping them in any way I could maintain as independent life as possible as they could in the community. And that's really what this is about. That's what the case manager's role is. I put in my written testimony a little bit of tongue-in-cheek language that they are part Sherpa guide, part tight wire walker with tenaciousness of a terrier and the heart of a lion. It's really quite true. They will do anything to keep the individuals they provide support to in the community and on track to achieve the goals that they have set for themselves. And it's really just quite that simple. If you look at the law that is the signature law in Kansas for our system, the Kansas Developmental Disabilities Reform Act, it lays out for us the key goals that we should be aiming for of independence, integration, inclusion, and productivity, those 4 words. And so to that end, that is a great deal of what case managers are all about, helping individuals be independent as possible, helping them integrate into our communities, helping them find inclusive spaces in our communities, and helping them to live productive, meaningful lives. That is the role of a case manager. And so they are, very, very focused in any way they can and any way they are allowed in promoting those aspects in the lives of the persons that they provide support to. Now, you've heard a lot here this afternoon about the restrictions on case management. And I think that's really important to point out, that this system has not always looked the way it does now. There was a point in time when Kansas, the IDD system, our case management system, used something that is now referred to nationally as the encounter-based model. And you heard that referred to a little bit by Roxanne earlier, but it used to be that providers would receive a monthly sum to provide this service to individuals. And then it was up to them to ensure that they were covering the bases, so to speak, to make sure the individuals were receiving the case management supports that they should receive. That monthly sum was a little less than $400. Then in 2007, that time frame, 2007, 2008, and my memory, I apologize, is a little fuzzy on the why of this, but there was interaction between the state and federal government and the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services provided some instruction to the state of Kansas at that time to restructure how case management was performed in the state of Kansas. That is when we went from the encounter-based model, which was very open and permissive in allowing case managers to do this work, to keep individuals independent in the community. We went from that model to the model you heard about earlier, 15-minute units, documentation, very restrictive on what can be reimbursed, 4 service categories that you heard Mandy refer to earlier: assessment, development of the plan of care, referral and related activities, and monitoring and follow-up. If what you're doing doesn't match those 4 categories, forget about it, because you're not going to be reimbursed. They don't forget about it. They do it anyway. If they can, if it's possible, if they're allowed to, they'll do it. But they just won't get reimbursed for it. And that's why we're starting to see providers close their doors. For a long time, providers, because of the critical nature and the importance of case management, they agreed to subsidize this service on behalf of the state. And so for years, providers in your communities have been robbing Peter to pay Paul, robbing budgets of other service programs and other funds within their organization to shore up a case management program that simply on its own would not have been sustainable. We hit a breaking point around the pandemic in which providers who had not received updates, significant updates to their funding at that point in time, and who were in the middle of handling a pandemic and who could not recruit and retain a workforce, simply could not cover the spread, so to speak, any longer. And so you began to see providers say, I don't think we can do this anymore. And the example that we heard about earlier is one such example, where a provider in Sedgwick County just simply could not carry that on their own any longer. And that caused a great deal of upheaval at the time, because these provider networks are not fungible. They're not. They have been eroded over time. Just they're very lean. They don't have. There's not a lot of extras in this system, and so when part of the capacity is lost, there is not. There's not a lot of extra capacity to be found to make that up. And so when these providers make these decisions, they become system challenges, not just a provider's decision any longer, but a systems challenge. So as Roxanne pointed out, smaller providers, independent providers of case management services have had, I think, a very difficult time, because they don't have multiple programs and services that they can perhaps alternate or figure out how to, balance the costs between. They're providing one service, and if they can't figure out how to make that sustainable, then, as you heard from Roxanne, they can't continue to do that work. And that is a challenge. We will eventually reach a point where we get into some problems. There is not supposed to be any hesitancy in an individual who wants to receive case management's ability to receive a case manager. They should, when they are eligible, be able to receive a case manager. However, the reality in many parts of the state is that people right now have to wait to receive a case manager because the capacity just isn't there. And that's not a good place for us to be. So I've included in my testimony that we have taken a pretty significant step in the right direction this session with the inclusion by Governor Kelly of 1.5 million SGF in her budget recommendations to raise the TCM hourly rate from where it currently is, $43.32 per hour, to a new hourly rate of $54.15, I believe, is what it would be under the governor's recommendation. So we applaud her leadership in this regard, and we are deeply grateful for her addition of those resources in her budget. However, I will tell you that our members have been studying this issue for some time. And in fact, we spent many months last year studying this. And our providers have looked at their cost data and know that they need more in order to reach a sustainable level for these services. And so I'm here today to ask you to consider this session increasing funding so that providers of this service can receive an hourly rate of $75 per hour. That's what my members tell me on average would be a sustainable level for this service. It's not going to make anyone rich providing it, but it will allow them to get their nose above the waterline for the first time in over a decade. And it would be a good step forward for us as a state to ensure that we don't allow the erosion of this case management system to go any further. And so I would just encourage some additional thoughtful exploration this session. This is a wonderful start to that. As I said, the governor's inclusion is just fantastic, and we're very grateful for that. But our folks have looked at the numbers and they know what the cost is to break even on this, and they would respectfully ask for you to consider thinking about a little more than that. I just want to close with the need for us all to remember the importance of the work that is done on behalf of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It was referred to a little bit earlier, but you know, I know that we are, as you referenced, Chair, earlier, on a journey together of learning. And a part of that is to recall that we're not too many decades removed from institutional care being the only real viable option in the state of Kansas for this population, which left them with no choice, no autonomy, and no hope of a future. We have moved so far beyond that now. And one of the critical reasons why we have been able to do that is the strong work of case managers like Sarah, Roxanne, and others. So thank you again for your time, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Matt. Do you have time for up to 10 minutes worth of questions?
I will stay as long as the committee wants to stay.
Representative Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Matt Fletcher. Okay, so I'm just doing a couple of Google searches, and maybe I'm not searching correctly here.
Sure.
So the average hourly rate of a social worker or a targeted case manager I came up with actually is $21 or $19. So I'm not sure where the resources come from that. I know you talked about Iowa even makes more. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand, and Google's usually not too far off, but
Sure.
I understand people need to make a good living too. But I just want to make sure I understand. So it's $43.32 per hour on a 40-hour week. Is that right? Which is a $90,000 per year salary. Is
So
that
it's
the right amount? And then if we go to 54, that's $112,000, $320 per year. Is that right?
So the number that we're referring to, those hourly rates, so it's probably not we should probably call that something else, because it might get a little misconstrued as what a wage would be. This is actually the reimbursement rate to the provider or to the organization that's providing the service, of which a portion would go to the wage of the case manager. So there's a number of other parts and pieces that would be factored into that.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you.
Representative Ballard.
I I think I understand Representative Barr's question. But what you're really saying is like, the agency may get this much money, but it doesn't mean that that money goes to that individual. Because there's other layers that have to
That,
be paid in the process. Am I correct?
You are. I think an important thing to remember is something that you all heard earlier, which is how little of a total amount of a case manager's day or week is actually allowable billable time. It may, I think we heard a 50% figure. If they could get to 50% billable time, they'd be happy. And I've heard similar comments from providers as well. So if you consider that at least half of the amount of time that your staff who are doing this work, and they're doing the work, but they just can't be reimbursed for that work, you need to probably think about that as a part of this as well.
I have a concern about not being able to bill for travel. And part of that is you can't get to your client if you don't have your car, or that if you don't buy gas, or the time that it takes. Now, a lot of people get paid for shield time. Part of this is if you're worried about that travel being exaggerated, you can do what the state normally will do. If I drive from here to Omaha, there are 3 different ways I can go, and there's 3 different mileages that you have. The state says you must only charge the lowest rate in order to get there. So if the client is going to a destination, you can determine what is the comparable salary so that they can't inflate it if you're worried about fraud. But if you are not able to charge for that to get to that job in order to deliver the service, then it takes your time. And that's what I've never really understood, that they weren't able to bill for that time to get there. Because it's a delivery of service, that's your work. It's not like my driving to my office at the University of Kansas. That's different, because yes, I'm gonna deliver my services.
Right.
But if I drive from there to the airport, they reimburse me. I think you have to look at what you can't bill for, but it is part of your direct delivery of service.
That is absolutely correct, is that there is a lot here that that is not incorporated into what goes into the case notes, if you will, the documentation that ultimately will decide whether Roxanne and others receive compensation or reimbursement for what they did. And it all depends on very narrow bands of the language they use, of what they did, and that's why a lot of what they do does not get covered as reimbursable activities. Transportation absolutely is a part of that. We have a rural provider who is a member of InterHab that has, the entire northwest corner of Kansas as their service territory. So their case managers are constantly in the car, driving for hours at a time to see clients. None of that is compensated in any way, but they provide the service anyway because it's critical for the individuals to have this tether and this guide to help them connect to the resources they need to help them accomplish the goals that they've set for themselves. So that's why people have hung on to this service for so long, even though, and I pulled this up, I just think it's incredibly prescient at this point, but testimony delivered in 2008 to the Legislative Budget Committee by the Secretary of SRS at the time, Don Jordan, providing an update to that committee about this transition from the old encounter-based model to this new 15-minute unit billing model and the $43 rate, hourly rate. And he acknowledges in his testimony, and Don is a great guy, by the way. I'm not going after Don here. Don't take me wrong. He had a fantastic public service record. But Don's comment in his testimony is that there was widespread concern. He acknowledged widespread concern that at that time, the $43 rate was going to be inadequate. So even in 2008, when the rate went in, people had looked at it and said, this is probably not going to cover costs. And here we are in 2023, still with the same rate.
Representative Clifford, and then Representative Donahoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your work, Ms. Fletcher. I know you know Mark Hind well from Finney County. We just heard from Director Fertig, Medicaid Director Fertig in the Health Committee, and she talked about the timeline for the RFPs for the MCOs. And I would assume you're collecting data that's more than anecdotal about the interaction, I'll just not to judge it, between TCMs and MCOs, because I think that would be very, very important input. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, and that was a great conversation earlier about you know, the function of the MCO care coordinator as it relates to the IDD system. Does it need to be looked at again? Yes. There are redundancies there. I'm not sure that we're getting great value for the funding that we're putting into that particular resource. I'm probably going to upset some people when I say that, but I think we could probably streamline the way those two systems, the care coordination and the TCM, interact with one another to make that make more sense and also be more efficient. Because as Roxanne pointed out, there's a lot of overlap and duplication in the work that's done between those two.
Thank you. I have to be reelected, so that's why I wanted you to say it.
Oh, okay. Well, happy to do that for you. I'll just sneak out the. Is there a side door here or an open window somewhere? No. Okay. All right.
Representative Donahoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fact that you don't get compensated, or that people don't get compensated for driving, does that prejudice where they would go?
You know, that's a great question. I don't think it does, because they're the kind of people that are going to crawl on their hands and knees if they need to get to the people that they need to see. But to your point, I was thinking about this earlier. I do think this system, the way it's designed, forces a kind of thought process on not only the case managers, but on the kind of the managers of the case management programs to try and force as much productivity as they can to get the reimbursement as high as they can. And that may not always coincide with what the case manager needs to be doing on behalf of the persons that they're providing support to. So I guess that's why I brought up the encounter-based model, because that was a simpler time when case managers kind of had that freedom to go do what they needed to get done. And by the way, other states are allowed to do the encounter-based model. Several other states do that. So we shouldn't have a problem if we wanted to revisit that again in Kansas with the federal government.
Excuse me. Do you have a fiscal note on the $75?
It should be, we're looking through some numbers on this, but we think it's around $4.5 million.
Is that from the 50, from the 54 to the 75, or where it's at?
That would be from the 43 to the 75.
So it's about how much?
Yes. There you go. Yes, so we think it would be about $4.5 million. But I have to tell you, Representative, I really need to go back and work on those numbers some more. So I don't want you to hold me to it. But I think that's very close in the ballpark.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we're about 5 o'clock, and I know the doctor has surgery tomorrow, so we should maybe adjourn. But let me ask you a couple quick more questions here.
Sure.
And I guess a comment. dovetailing off of Representative Barr's, I have to confess that I had that same temptation to multiply by 2,000.
Yeah.
But now I understand that, you know, we're just not talking about just straight hours. We're talking about,
Right.
you know, it's very much like an airline pilot. The airline pilot does the walk around and they check the gauges and they do all these things. They get
Makes sense.
paid from gate to gate, and that's
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah. No, I have been around this system since 1999, and you would be, it's humbling. This system will humble you. It's Zen-like. Every question you answer opens 10 more questions, so.
Last question then. The governor's recommendation was for like 3.8 all funds, million, 1.5 of which is state general fund. And that's assuming the 60-40 match, right?
That's correct.
So if we were to have an extra increase beyond that, if by some chance we did that, that too would fall in the 60-40 match.
That's correct. That all goes into what it would take to get to the $75 an hour rate. That's all required. The federal and the state together is what would be required. But just a little bit, because that did come up earlier, that is that federal medical assistance percentage, that FMAP, that is one of those really magical streams of funding that is, it's really important. And in Kansas, I think it hovers around 60% for most of the things that we will come and talk to you about in the IDD world. But it's based on your state's per capita income. So it will vary from time to time. I think we've had it go down in some years and go up in some years. But you can usually kind of average on a 60-40 split, feds and state. So.
Well, I'd like to thank all the conferees. This is great food for thought. Thank you for great presentations, everyone. And committee, we're adjourned.
Thank you.